Hi everyone, this is the lecture to accompany Chapter 14 in your textbook. Please read Chapter 14 carefully. There's a lot of information I don't have time to address in this lecture. Okay, let's put our critical thinking skills to work as we look at the media. The vast majority of our knowledge of current events in the world around us comes from things like television, radio, the internet, our computer screens, newspapers, magazines, and billboards. This results in a constant and unending stream of information, including, of course, persuasive messages that can become overwhelming. Our natural tendency is to just kind of soak it up and accept it and not question it, because there's just too much to deal with. However, in this day and age, it's more important than ever that we apply our critical thinking skills to the messages sent to us through all these media outlets. This chapter looks at both news and advertising sources, the ways they are connected, and how to do your due diligence as a media consumer. The mass media got its name not because of the size of the media organizations themselves, although some of these media companies are indeed huge, but because of the massive audience they reach. But it's not just news. It also includes music and movies, magazines, newspapers, posters, flyers, comic books, novels, textbooks, or any published or printed material. Not only that, the term mass media also refers to the people who create and produce that media, like journalists, news anchors, editors, and even performers. Mass media outlets are often audience-specific, catering to things like intelligence level in their readers, listeners, or viewers. So things like the Wall Street Journal, NPR, and PBS cater to people of above average intelligence. They might cater to political affiliation. There are news outlets on all sides of the political spectrum. Conservative news outlets like National Review or Fox News, and liberal outlets such as Slate and the New York Times. They might even cater to specific interests or groups. Sports Illustrated, for example, caters to people interested in sports. Parents Magazine caters, of course, to parents. Audience-specific organizations often favor one side of the story and have a distinct editorial bias. Others, such as Time, Newsweek, USA Today, and most local and national news outlets like the three major networks and local affiliates, say they cater to the broader audience of nearly everyone, so they try to be more even-handed. As an example, here in Las Vegas, we have a Fox affiliate, Channel 5. Its local news reporting is not slanted towards a conservative audience at all. It's definitely middle-of-the-road journalism. Generally, mass media has been considered one-way communication. In other words, the message goes from the media outlet in the direction of the consumer, and the consumer doesn't generally send a message back, although consumers might have been able to respond via email or comment sections. However, that has begun to change over the past decade, largely due to social media. Social media is a specific form of mass media that allows formerly passive media consumers like you and I to participate in the production and sharing of information on publicly accessible websites. If you're young enough, you probably don't even remember a time when these sites like Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, and many others didn't exist. These are collaborative in nature. We can create and modify content, share it with others, and comment on it. Unlike before, information can flow in both directions. There are certainly a lot of benefits to social media. We can communicate with people we don't know from places we've never been and see the world through the eyes of those people, giving us new perspectives. People who were formerly powerless in society, like marginalized political and cultural populations, have a voice now. Important information that we need to know, maybe things that could affect our safety, can get out to the public quickly and effectively. Sites like YouTube allow talented musicians, artists, and writers to showcase their work. All these things allow collaborative contribution to our general body of knowledge. However, there are some disturbing and negative things that have come from the rise of social media. Even though people have access to all kinds of information and all ways of looking at the world, Their natural tendency is to ignore or demean viewpoints that they don't agree with and pay more attention to viewpoints that they share. That shared information is often incomplete and unreliable, as it's often shared in the moment and only from one perspective. And of course, lots of information on social media is pretty unimportant, like what you had for dinner or what you're going to watch on TV. Perhaps the most disturbing thing about social media is that it tends to give the impression that all ideas and opinions should carry equal weight. Fringe ideas, conspiracy theories, and just plain hateful viewpoints get equal play along with logical, rational, and well thought out ideas. And sometimes the craziness wins out because it's just louder and more interesting, and that can be potentially dangerous. There are ways you can approach social media that will help you avoid falling into its trap and possibly spreading misinformation. First, approach it in the spirit that gave rise to it, as a source of interesting, entertaining information that can reinforce a sense of community and keep people connected. Please never consider it the best or final source for credible news and information. Just because you read it there doesn't make it true. Always consider that what you're reading may be opinionated and highly biased, and produced by people who may be unqualified to speak to the topic. Never share information without first checking it out with an unbiased source. I can't tell you how many times I've pointed out to a friend that the information they've shared is from a parody site or is simply not true. Most of those people are still my friends. Keep in mind that social media is very fluid. Information can change rapidly, and what was considered the most up-to-date information can quickly become outdated as new information comes to light. Realize that people's reputations and lives can be impacted by the spread of unsubstantiated rumors. Even if the information is shown to be true, is it still really news? Realize that political groups and corporations often use social media to spread their agenda, candidate, product, or service. Something that the book doesn't address here, but is very important, is that when you click on an article, someone somewhere is making money off of that click. And that person or entity might be someone you really don't want to support, especially if it's connected somehow to a purveyor of fake news. So be wary. Think twice before you click on something, and do your research before you share things. We cannot be everywhere and see everything, so we're dependent on the news media to provide us with information. But what we get from them is often only a tiny fraction of what is actually going on. Unfortunately, media outlets like newspapers and television networks are limited by time and space. For an evening news program, they only have so many seconds to devote to any given story, and newspapers only have so much space on their pages. In an effort to hold our attention and thus keep us viewing and reading, news organizations often present us information that lacks enough content for us to get a reliable, bigger picture. If you've ever watched the CBS Evening News, you know they start with a segment called Your World in 90 Seconds, which runs down the biggest news stories that day, but really only touches on each of them. So if that's all the news you take away from that show, you're not going to have a good idea of what happened. The use of sound bites in television news, which are small snippets of a speaker's comments taken from a larger, more comprehensive discourse. The media tries to get the most important passages, but often the context is missing, so the comments might be misinterpreted, and when taken out of context, often seem to mean something completely different than what the speaker intended, so you have to watch out for that. This is not to say that network news doesn't provide us with any useful information. It's certainly good for getting the basics. However, the news usually does not provide the in-depth information necessary to fully understand a topic, issue, or current event. I will say that there are some news shows that attempt to do this, like Washington Week in Review on PBS or Meet the Press on NBC. But it's really up to you if you want or need to know. A deeper look and research will always be required. Here's something that is very true, but we hardly ever consider. The media is not free, even if we are individually not paying for it. With the rare exception of public broadcasting stations like PBS and NPR, all media is fueled by advertising. The money advertisers spend on ad time or space is used to produce the media. Without advertising, there wouldn't be any news programs or Facebook. That's what's behind everything you see or read. The more people watch, read, or listen to a particular media outlet, the more that outlet's ad time is worth, and the more that they can charge. The news media in particular knows that there are lots of other contenders for your attention from other media sources, like the internet, movies, video games, those kinds of things. Also, they know that some people simply don't have good comprehension skills and therefore don't really listen to in-depth analysis. Most people would just tune that out because they either can't understand it or don't care. So they give you what sounds good and will keep you interested, which is short, to-the-point information. And if it's a media outlet that has a particular bias, short, to-the-point information with a particular editorial slant that caters to your worldview. There's nothing inherently wrong with making the consumption of news more entertaining. It's in our nature to pay more attention to things if they're interesting or told in a way that gets our attention. The more entertaining something is, the more likely we are to tune in. Being entertaining is fine, but only if doing so doesn't sacrifice journalistic integrity. So how does the news media entertain us? Sadly, sometimes it's by giving us dumbed-down information that is, as it says here, fun to eat, but ultimately unhealthy. Editors select particular events and details about those events, and because of space and time constraints, this can lead to slanted news. What about a particular event is most newsworthy, most interesting? How much time do they have to spend on it? Just based on those choices alone, you can see that some important information might be overlooked. What makes the news? Well, usually what is most attention-getting, not what is actually the most important. So things like plane crashes, dead celebrities, military actions, and grand-scale violence will always be given full and complete coverage. This is not to say those things aren't important, but they are often favored at the expense of other equally or even more important news. What doesn't make the news? Complicated stories that would take a long time to explain, things that are critical of powerful organizations, or maybe even the media itself. This link here is to something called projectcensored.org. I will put the link in an announcement so you can check it. But what it does is talk about stories that either are about the media or are about things that the media simply does not have the time to go into detail on. One of the things that affects what we see and hear is the way that stories are arranged and organized. By headlining or emphasizing a story, the media can make us think something is more important than it is. A story that's equally important might get buried on the back pages of a newspaper or reported halfway through a newscast instead of in the first few minutes. I will tell you that the majority of journalists are ethical, honest reporters who do their best to avoid slanting a story. But that having been said, pure objectivity is almost impossible. After all, journalists are humans, and we all have biases. And sometimes attempts to be absolutely and totally objective by just reporting what they hear can often lead to them simply reporting rumors and passing on misinformation, and that's not what the news is for. The question for many media consumers might be, is there a liberal bias in the mainstream media? Well, I can tell you that a majority, though certainly not all, of reporters tend towards the liberal. That's because more college students who major in journalism say that they are liberal, and most communication and journalism professors tend to be liberal as well. Again, not all of them, but many. That having been said, there really is not much of a case for media bias, at least in the mainstream media. It wouldn't be profitable for them. It would alienate the public, which is in the middle or on the other side. Now, the people that do see the media as biased on the other side is generally because they have a particular viewpoint. If someone is liberal, then they think the media might have a conservative bias. And if someone is conservative, they might think that the media has a liberal bias. And this is obviously due to our own biases rather than what is actually there. Now, I haven't even addressed the idea of fake news. It's not addressed in the textbook because it's a fairly new phenomenon. We're going to talk about it in class, and I have readings for you that address it. But the idea that news you don't agree with or like can be labeled fake is a really dangerous one. Fake news is something completely different than just news you don't like. A legitimate news site that has editorial standards and lives up to them is not guilty of printing fake news. It may be opinionated news, though. The expression of opinion in all forms of media has become increasingly common. Lots of people get their news from shows that are not news shows but opinion shows, like The O'Reilly Factor or The Daily Show. Don't get those things confused with mainstream news sources, most of which have a reporting staff for straight news and people whose job it is to express their opinions about the news. Those are two different sets of people. So make sure you understand the difference between reporting the news and editorializing on it, and be willing to look at and evaluate the claims and arguments of others. So a few words on becoming more media literate. Realize that the media is a great thing and we really can't function fully in society without it. But we also need to recognize that the traditional lines between news, entertainment, and advertising have become somewhat blurred. When news becomes infotainment, we need to be on guard. Don't mistake opinions for facts. Shows that look like news are often opinion-based editorializing of news events. Don't just accept what those people are telling you, even if it sounds good. Realize your biases and look at the information critically. Recognize that there might be lots of important stories that you aren't hearing about. The arrangement and organization of stories can make those stories appear more important than others. Try to find other legitimate sources of information. I like the BBC and Al Jazeera, as they give entirely different perspectives on world news than American sources and often provide more information. You might be surprised what you find there. Okay, let's spend the rest of the lecture talking about advertising. It's all around us. You couldn't escape it if you wanted to. It drives the mass media. It's the whole reason the mass media exists. Advertisement has two basic functions: to inform people about products and services so that you know they exist, and to motivate you to take some kind of action, usually to purchase those products and services. Advertisement does this by not only mirroring the values of our society, in other words, showing us what we value and what we want, it also shapes our values by showing us what we should value and what we should want. Because it tends to focus only on certain values while ignoring others, it can give us a distorted picture of what is truly important in our society and what we truly need. Some of the things that advertising does: as I said, it informs the public. It can certainly inform us about important things like health and safety issues. It drives competition and the development of new products. It makes large-scale production and consumption possible, which brings the prices of goods down. And very importantly, the money that advertising funnels into the news media makes it less likely that the government will intervene and control the media, which is critically important in a free society. But there are many criticisms of advertisement as well. As I said, it's everywhere and can be extremely intrusive. Those pop-up ads on your computer are annoying and sometimes impossible to get rid of. And it's very annoying when you're scrolling through an article on your phone and you accidentally click on an ad and some video pops up and you have to wait 15 seconds until the X pops up and you can close it. It also tends to skew our values, making us a more materialistic society. It takes advantage of young or more malleable minds. It promotes and continues stereotypes. and tends to use a lot of deceptive, less than totally honest techniques to sell products. The majority of things that we buy, like groceries and household products, involve what's called low involvement buying. This means we don't really give much thought to those purchases. So we might grab a product that we saw in an ad, or we might buy the cheapest thing, but we don't exercise a lot of brain power when making those purchases. On the other end of the scale is high involvement buying. A car, a TV, a home, or other major purchase falls into this category. We tend to do a lot of research, asking around, checking out consumer reports, because at these prices, there do tend to be major differences between products. So we may pay more attention to ads about these products. However, ads about low involvement products are still effective. We just don't focus on them quite as much. Regardless of the product being advertised, advertisers tend to have techniques in their toolboxes to make us remember their product and desire to have it. These techniques are effective mostly because they short-circuit our critical thinking skills and cause us not to use our best judgment. Let's look at some of these techniques. Humor. The only reason I ever watch the Super Bowl is so I can see the funny ads. Humor is a very powerful persuasive tool. It catches us off guard, makes us feel good, and lowers our critical defenses. And we remember it when we go to the store. If you want to see a genius humor ad, go to YouTube and type in Dollar Shave Club ad. It's hysterical. Catchy slogans and jingles. Most of us can't remember who our first grade teacher was, but we can remember every slogan and jingle we heard on TV growing up. They tend to be catchy but repetitive, and that's why we remember them. They stick in our minds forever. And if we remember it, we are more likely to purchase the brand it's associated with. Coca-Cola, State Farm Insurance, Kit Kat candy bars, and many other products have been sold using this technique. Causing anxiety is another way ads get our attention. The strategy here is to make us uncomfortable in some way, usually by pointing out something that is or might be wrong with us. Are you going bald? Are you overweight? Are your teeth not perfectly white? Then they provide us with a product that claims to fix that problem. And if we use it, our life will come back into balance. Listerine sells a lot of mouthwash this way. Emotive language is often used in advertisements. Words do have an emotional content, and ads tend to use words that evoke positive feelings about their products. And emotion tends to trump reason when it comes to persuasive messages. So the better we feel about a product, the more likely it is we're going to buy it. The book uses the examples of a cigarette ad in a magazine describing it as having a smooth, fresh, natural taste. Okay, not sure I'd use those words, but they chose them to evoke a particular feeling in the mind of a smoker. Weasel words are sneaky by nature, and that's why they call them weasel words. They qualify the claim being made to the point that it is really meaningless, but the target audience doesn't generally pick up on that. Words like may help, as in product X may help relieve the pain of migraines. The audience hears relieve the pain of migraines, but the words may help really signify that chances are likely that the product won't really do much of anything. They may help, but they may not. And fine print disclaimers. Now, the older I get, the harder that stuff is to read. Most of the time, nobody reads it anyway. And those who do often realize that what the big print says is very misleading. But since it's in there, you don't really have a legal leg to stand on if the product doesn't meet your expectations. Then we have puffery. These tend to be over-exaggerated, often outrageous claims that most people can see are not necessarily true. But because they tend to be outrageous, they don't fall into the category of actual false advertising. The book uses the example of a Radio Shack ad proclaiming prices so hot the fire department comes by to hose off the store every half an hour. Obviously, that's not the case, but it gets the point across that they are having a sale. Sex appeal has been used to sell products ever since there were products to sell. Beautiful or handsome models or actors are often used to sell products, even if there's no direct connection between the product and actual sex. Like a woman yelling orgasmically while washing her hair with Herbal Essence shampoo, or Paris Hilton wearing very little and sliding all over an expensive car while eating a Carl's Jr. hamburger. Yes, that happened. The connection between attractive, sexy people and a product can actually make that product seem more desirable. Feel-good ads. Just like humor and emotive ads, feel-good ads create a positive connection between the product and the feeling. Android's Friends Forever, that's F-U-R-E-V-E-R ad, you can also find that on YouTube, is 1 minute of pure adorableness that makes you feel very good about their product. Then there are image ads. Image ads tend to be used by high-end brands, and they use this technique to reach their target audience of high-income, discerning consumers, like the people who sell Rolex watches or Rolls Royces or high-end designer clothing. But it can also be used to sell regular products by making them seem classy or at least more expensive, but worth the price, like a Butterball turkey compared to a store brand. And of course, let's not forget celebrity endorsements. We all have our favorite celebrity, and we might envy them, admire them, relate to them, or want to be them. So when we see them endorsing a product, that opens up a connection from us to that product via the celebrity. Of course, we know they were paid to appear in that ad, but it somehow doesn't matter. We still remember that product and are more likely to buy it. This is the end of the lecture on Chapter 14.